Hello, and thank you for joining HBCUGO.TV and Tennessee State University for its virtual masterclass series. We feature award-winning broadcasters, directors, production specialists, and others in the field that will help you with your communications career. Today, we have the pleasure of hearing from Shelby Emmett. Shelby is the nation's only Black female First Amendment attorney and free speech advocate. She's helping communities embrace free speech and open dialogue to create opportunities for progress and understanding. Shelby is also the director of free expression policy at the Charles Koch Institute and Stand Together. Shelby, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you doing? Oh, we're going to get your mic.
Oh, I'm doing fabulous. How are you doing? Sorry
No
about
problem.
that.
I'm great. Thank you so much. Let's go ahead and start from the beginning. Just tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure. So I'm Shelby. I'm originally from Detroit, Michigan, born and raised. I've always just for some weird reason was excited and interested with American history. And I think it always came from a place of my story was never in the textbooks, right? We get little chapters here and there, but I always thought, okay, we're talking about this great country and all these liberties, but where did I fit in each day and each decade and each century through this progress that we were hopefully still trying to make today, right? So I think that's where my passion came from. And then just growing up, particularly in a inner city where I didn't see a lot of opportunities, but I then moved to a suburb and I saw just overnight, just moving 20 feet basically, and I saw the difference in disparity and the outcomes and the opportunities I had. And that made me just really interested to find out where did this all start and what are the best tools to make sure that I'm able to get the progress that I want, but also for all my friends back home. And through that, I just fell in love with the First Amendment and free speech because it's the one tool in the arsenal that allows everything else the possibility to happen. Don't know if it will happen, but it's the one thing that gives you the opportunity for it to actually change.
Absolutely. So with that being said, let's go ahead and dive right in. Tell us about the First Amendment. There are some people listening who may not even know what it is. So let's start there.
Exactly. So the First Amendment, it is the first in the Bill of Rights. And the Bill of Rights was basically that first time that they said, all right, we need to change what we did. Quick backstory. Yes, they knew that they were going to do this. And it was kind of that first political compromise. All right, pass the Constitution. We know some of you are still a little freaked out that the government's going to overtake everything. Because remind you, they had just left, the biggest empire in the world. And so as soon as they got back into session, it was ratified. They said, all right, we need to make sure that we can limit basically the man. And so our system is basically designed to limit the federal government and allow the people and the states to basically grow and expand and fight back is the most basic way. So the First Amendment just basically, it protects five main things. It protects your right to speech, protects your right to religious or no religion at all. And that just basically means the state can't dictate one way or the other. Obviously, your right to protest, to assemble, and all of this means you have to do this peacefully. But it also allows for your right to associate. So whether that's associating through if you're in a sorority or a frat, right? That's an association. That's a private association. Or it's you a member of a union or a member of your church. It's that right to associate. So in the free speech protest world, you see like an organizations pop up, like a Black Lives Matter organization that is allowed because we have the First Amendment.
Great. And why do you think we have them all together like that?
I would like to say it's because at a minimum, putting yourselves back in 1776, if you were that founder that was fighting to maintain his interest against the crown, you'd want to make sure that you have the ability to fight back and push back on that, right? So if we go back to the original 13 colonies, they were all kind of their own thing and all fighting for their own interest. And so I just think historically, when we look at, our great experiment was we were the first nation to say, we're not going to design something based off what the government or the crown is going to tell us how we can operate. It's going to come from us. And so I think it was important to put all of those together because they realized it was going to take more than just your ability to, I forgot free press, sorry. It was just more than publishing a paper. You had to be able to talk about publishing a paper and you had to be able to organize around writing what you wanted to say and put your ideas on paper. So I just think they all have to work together in order for any of them to work efficiently at all.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about the relationship between freedom and equality.
It's complicated. I think this is the internal struggle that Americans fight for, right? We've got these great documents, these great ideals. They're just ideals. And these ideals and these principles only matter as much as the people that are exposing them, right? Or living them every day. And in my job at Stand Together, we like to say that it's about that social entrepreneurship, right? You can believe in freedom, but you only truly believe in freedom if you believe in it for everybody, and that's that difference. So there's I think my grandfather explained this to me best, and that was, you know, freedom is great until you have to start paying bills, right? So you have this, everyone wanted to drive, and then as soon as your mom made you go to the store to do something, you're like, oh, well, this isn't fun. So freedom's not always going to be fun, right? But it's that opportunity to be able to be free allows you those opportunities. Sometimes they're bad, sometimes they're good. I think part of being an adult is realizing that sometimes the bad things are because you just did bad stuff, you made poor choices. But that whole point is, it's not about equal outcomes. It's about equal opportunities. Some of us might be a lot smarter at something. Some of us might have that sibling that we just know isn't. And that doesn't mean that they don't deserve to live their dreams and do their thing, but some of us may have siblings like I do that are just really, really good at others, but me, I'm never going to be a math instructor. That's not ever going to happen for me. So you wouldn't want to give me, right, the professorship of the math department because all of these students would fail. You don't want that.
Same here. But so these two ideals, freedom, equality, are they opposed to one another? Are they, synonymous?
I think they work together in certain ways, right? So having the freedom to go after what you want in life allows you to create your own sense of opportunity and equality for yourself of how you want to define it. However, within the confines of our law and our structure, we need to make sure those policies and those laws set that same equal foundation for us to rise or fail on our own accord, right? So it's about making sure that everyone has the same opportunities and you're able to break those same barriers, but the outcome isn't supposed to be guaranteed, right? That's supposed to be the fun part of life.
Got it. And, tell us, why is it important to distinguish between these two abstract terms in a liberal society?
It's important because the one negative thing about when you live in a democracy and a republic is what we want doesn't always matter, right? Because we're living with everybody else. If we lived in a dictatorship, I wouldn't have to worry about what you think, and you wouldn't have to worry about what I think, because we could just look at the king and he would just tell us what we think, and that would be it, right? And that could be a lot easier sometimes. I think there's probably days when all of us are just like, I'll say as a First Amendment attorney, sometimes I just wish people wouldn't use it because I need a break, right? But that's not how it works. So I think that's the premise, is that when you live in a constitutional republic, your rights end where it would infringe on someone else's. So you're constantly supposed to be thinking about your own self-interest. There's nothing inherently wrong of making sure your autonomous individual being is okay, but you have to be aware of the other human being in terms of your rights don't overwhelm theirs.
Right.
So in the free speech context, particularly on college campuses, for example, you may not like a particular argument or a particular book or a particular discussion, but you don't have the right to tell somebody else that they can't access that knowledge, right? Now you have the right to counter it. You have the right to not listen to it yourself, but you don't have the right to deny another person the same rights and opportunities that you have, even if you disagree with them. And that's kind of the icky side of freedom, right? It also means you have to tolerate the annoying cousin that comes to Thanksgiving dinner.
Absolutely. So I think with everything that you just said, this goes into my next question. Well, let's talk about how difficult it is to define hate and hate speech, and maybe even throw in free speech.
It's incredibly difficult. So as one of, very few minorities in this field, and I have yet to meet another Black female in my space, I'm constantly, rolling my eyes at the things that I defend. It is, for the most part, you're not ever going to defend the guy that wants to give everyone a puppy and chocolate, right? Like, if that was the field, that would be fabulous. you are dealing usually with the people that are the most disgusting in terms of what they want to say, right? But you do that because someone else might think what you want to say is hate speech. So I defend all of it, not because I care what those other people think. I do it because I'm incredibly selfish. And particularly as a Black woman, I know that my voice has rarely, if ever, been elevated. But I know that if I start saying, oh, this guy over here can't talk, I know historically, and I know probably in the future, the first group who they're going to stomp on first will probably be me. So, in order to ensure that I'm able to run my mouth, I have to defend even the hateful speech just so I can do it for myself. Perfect example, before a lot of these protests and things really capitalized and really came to fruition this year, I worked a lot with legislators across the country. And as these things were starting to slowly come up, and particularly after Ferguson, you saw people on both sides, on the left, on the right, that wanted to start cracking down on protest. Whether it was, I've had people say, we need to make sure students can't be too boisterous on campus. That was an actual bill someone put out. Or, someone saying, what, I think that local Black Lives Matter organization is a hate group. Or, but I think that local Christian organization is a hate group. That's scary because I can promise you, the hate group that you think is a hate group today might be the group that you think is the one you're aligned with tomorrow. Everything switches. And so it's just incredibly important to defend what you don't like so you can defend the things that you do like.
Absolutely. That makes complete sense. I want to come back to this, but I just want to ask you, how did you get to where you are? You say you don't see a lot of people that look like us in your field. Help us.
Please, please, please join. It's like, obviously, I don't think anyone in the field is going to lose a job anytime soon. I think for me, I've always just been very vocal. I have always believed in, as an attorney, I always truly believed in advocacy. As I referred to earlier, I grew up in an inner city that didn't get a lot of attention. That is always the stat, right, that people look to, but no one actually talks to you. Everyone can, look at you and say, oh, you're from Detroit, and you're this and this and this and this, but very rarely did anyone actually come and talk to me.
Yeah.
And from both parties, left and right, I never really felt anyone was advocating for me. So I think it became incredibly important to make sure that I was advocating for myself. And then through that, realizing that because the number one fear, for example, is public speaking. I have no fear of it. I can just do it. And so I think it's important just to also make sure, particularly if you're a lawyer, that you want to make sure that other people have the ability to use their voice, and making sure that you can amplify the voices of others who may not be in the best position to. So I think that's where it really led me. Now, is it fun all the time? No. It's a very hard field. You have to have a very thick skin, and you can't get in your feelings about it. But I think it's completely 100% worth it, because a lot of the time you also see people use minorities in order to justify whether allowing a speech or not allowing a speech, right? So, oh, I'm going to censor you because in the name of race relations and I'm down and I'm woke, what you're saying is wrong. Well, I don't want a bunch of people speaking for me.
Right.
I want to speak for me.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. But I do want to hop back to hate and hate speech. So, just tell us, what are some activities that you consider, speech? Protesting, charity,
Well, speech is in every single thing. It's not just, so legally, it's not just your words, it's also symbolic demonstration. So, for example, whenever you're standing to salute the American flag during the national anthem, that's a form of symbolic demonstration. Same inverse, right? If you're kneeling during the protest, that is a symbolic registration. Burning the flag is a form of symbolic protest. So the courts have ruled throughout time. The cool thing about First Amendment law is, regardless of what side you're on, everyone's very aware that it's very subjective. So the key is to make it as robust. So hate, I will say, is in the eye of the beholder. Me personally, I don't care one way or the other if you salute or burn a flag. I can name you 50 people on both sides that I will get emails from because I just said that. So I think it's very subjective, and sometimes people don't look at the emotions of it, but there are limits. So some people think that free speech is just free. It's not. There are limits. You can't threaten somebody. You can't commit perjury, right? You can't just go on the stand and lie. You can't make threats. You can't have false advertising and just say, oh, drink this water. It will make you lose 60 pounds, right? No, you will get in trouble for that.
Right.
So there are limits on speech. However, it's an incredibly high threshold because people understand that the general theory being the more diverse conversation you have, that allows society to grow and lead to a better position in the long run.
Gotcha. So why are some activities and others not?
So in the law, there's a very fine line, right? So I can say and do whatever I want so long as I'm not violating one of those exceptions to free speech, i.e. I can't make terrorist threats. I can't call my school to get out of a final and say there's a bomb, right? Those are things you can't do because you're hurting other people. You're stopping their ability to get an education or walk down the street or not feel like they're going to get killed because you just threatened them, right? But on the flip side of that, it also has to rise to an actual level that actually does harm you. So unfortunately, just because someone may say something, a racial slur or whatever else, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a violation of the First Amendment. Now, it may make you a jerk and it makes you a horrible human being, but it doesn't rise to a level where the government can punish you for it.
Got it. And so is it the same thing on social media? Can you talk to us a little bit about hate speech on social media? I think that that's so interesting.
Yes. So the basic premise is under the First Amendment, what it basically says is the government, the public sector, cannot tell you that you can or cannot say anything. And if they do restrict it, they have to do so equally across the board, right? So they can't say that frat over there is allowed to do X, but that sorority over there is not. Everyone has the same rules and plays by the same game. In terms of the social media itself has First Amendment protections because it's an association, just like the NFL. It is a private entity. So they can create whatever rule they want. If they want to kick you off because they don't like what you've said, but they want to keep me on, that's okay. They're allowed to do that. So private sector, private companies, they're allowed to have whatever rules they want. Your public university, your public library, they have other rules. And so in the education context, it's very similar. If you're at a public university, like I went to Michigan State, they have to follow the First Amendment. If you're at a private institution like Howard University or something else, they don't. So then it turns into contract law. So when you look at social media, because they're a private company, they're a private platform, the First Amendment doesn't apply to them. They're shielded by the same thing that the NFL is shielded for. I'm an association. I can create whatever rules that I want, and Donald Trump can't tell me otherwise. Same thing happens here with social media. The problem with social media, though, is I think everybody wants somebody else in the room to police everybody, right? And I don't know if culturally that is a good idea. Me personally, if I don't like what somebody's saying, I will just ignore it. But I do think that our data is starting to show that more and more people are expecting the social media platforms to police everything. And that starts trouble too, because I think a lot of Americans, regardless of what it is legally, we have started to see our social platforms as our new virtual town square, right? This is where we come to organize and chat and plan protests and plan rallies. So I do think Americans need to come to a consensus on what is it we want our nation to be. Do we really want to be a place where we're honestly, I think, really becoming our worst selves and bullying each other and, oh, I'm going to get this person fired because they don't support this? And I don't know if that's going to help. And I definitely have seen it eat each other. So the same people that were, I'm going to get you fired because you said this, are now seeing it hit them on the other side. And I think we've seen that with comedians, right? Oh, you said something, you posted a slur 7 years ago. Now I'm going to destroy you for it.
Right.
I'm pretty sure if we all look back, we probably all have said something that we may not want an employer, a professor, or someone else to know about.
Exactly. Such great points.
Be a little more gracious. I think it would help.
Exactly. And it's so difficult because how do you even police that? Social media is supposed to be done on my private time. And now you want to get upset that I said something on social media and then possibly fire me for it. It's just then you're always working or you're never your true authentic self,
Yes, and I think I think that's such a great point you just made, because I think a lot of companies now, and you probably have it in your HR manual, I know I do in mine, right? We want you to be your authentic self, and everybody's like, nah.
No.
But part of that is because we've all become the bully on the playground, right? I think there's like some self-righteousness to it, like, oh, I've heard something that I don't like and I'm going to stand up. I think that's fabulous. But are you really trying to engage and change hearts and minds, or are you just trying to bully people? And I don't know if necessarily bullying people is a way to market your strategy goal.
Right. Very much agreed. Very much agreed. So let's keep going. I have a question. Is the right to be anonymous essential to free expression?
It is. So there is a landmark case, NAACP v. Alabama, from the late 50s, early 60s. And basically, that case was when the attorney general there and the government, the man, basically was trying to find a way to intimidate the donors to the NAACP and other civil rights orgs. So basically, they said, you know what? We got to make sure you're dotting all your I's and all your T's are crossed. So why don't you hand over that donor database of yours and just let us make sure everything's good? I think we can all agree that giving, private information of your donors to Alabama in the 1950s probably would not have been smart. But you start to see this prop up now. There's been issues, throughout the country, whether you're a left-leaning organization or a right-leaning organization, of wanting to, in the attempt, whether it's tax purposes or whatever, to tap into that private association to dig into what these donors are doing. Now that's separate than like campaign finance laws. This is a very separate issue. But yes, your right to be anonymous is important. So just a couple quick historical examples. The Constitution itself, the fact that we are a nation today, that was all debated back and forth through the Federalist Papers. And we know now who they were, but at the time, they were just debating back and forth different things like Federalist 10, but they did that anonymously. You look then, in the anti-slavery movement, so many of these newspapers and the things founded by had to be done anonymously because people were literally going to get killed just for speaking out on things people said was hate speech, right? It would be hateful for you to say that we're created equal, so we better make sure you can organize. And then even more recently, whether you're talking about a gun club or you're talking about an organization that's dedicated to pro-choice issues or pro-life issues, if people don't have the right to be anonymous, it makes you wonder, how much active would they be? And you also see the impact in philanthropy. Great example, George Michael, the 80s pop star. He was actually really into a lot of philanthropy organizations, but he was afraid that if his name was attached to it, there might be a Christian organization that didn't like that he was so, passionate and exposed with who he was, right? But he still genuinely cared about those issues. And he didn't want the church to have to worry or other donors. He just wanted to do the good work and not make it about him. So we have to look at it that way too. And also for all three faiths, the basic pillar is you don't brag about it, right? You're supposed to be charitable, not to say, oh, look, I'm Shelby. I gave my money this week. I am so blessed. And look how great I am. You're not supposed to be doing that. And I think the third, and you'll respect this more than anyone because you're a professor and you get it, we're supposed to be focused on the ideas, right? Not it shouldn't matter if I believe in liberty and I say liberty is good. Should it matter if I'm a female, that I'm this, that I'm that? We should be able to debate the ideas. And sometimes because of human nature, when we connect it to a person, we can allow ourselves to just allow our own bias to come in instead of critically thinking about the idea itself.
Absolutely. So, with all that being said, I have another question. How often do you represent a media entity on a freedom of press issue?
So I don't do any specific litigation on free speech with media.
Okay,
What I focus on specifically are the policy fights that we see. So
got it.
my job is to kind of look at the big picture and say, all right, we're starting to see attacks over here on, media or anonymous speech or campus speech codes. What do we need to look at? What is happening in the courts? But I will say, media wise, one of the things that is of interest and that what we do focus on is Section 230 within the social media platform. So, Section 230 in the federal law is basically the law that says the actual platform isn't responsible for the stuff we say, right? So, the platform we're using now, HBCU TV, they're the platform.
Mhm.
Um, you and I might say something right now in this conversation that offends somebody. And, they wouldn't be held liable. You could sue HBCU TV for what you and I have said, whatever pain we may have caused. So it's there to protect that open platform so we can have those conversations. And of course, for those of us born when the internet was first starting, I think we can see that there's been a lot of good for that, but also it's brought out people's inner basement demon. But I think you could say that about the invention of the radio too.
True. Absolutely. And we have a couple of student questions. So we had some students weigh in and they just wanted to ask you some things about your career. So the first question is, if you could speak to your younger self, what is some advice that you would give?
Hmm.
And I guess
I
what would you
think
have done differently?
the first thing that I would say is whatever plan that you've given yourself, scratch it. Um, Not that it can't happen, but I think students probably have a better idea of what I'm talking about than my generation did. So I graduated 6 weeks before the Great Recession hit, and everything changed. I think students right now are going through that, right? They had their plan, this was it, and then COVID hit. And your plan now just has to change. What I will say is that's a great first lesson in life. That's, I think, the number one thing to be an adult is whatever plan you have, it's probably going to change. And to really learn to embrace that and to ride that wave, because I do believe things all happen for a reason in the end.
Mhm.
And so I think it just helps you grow. And I think the second piece of advice that I would have is early on, really, really embrace getting to know people who are different than you. I just think in your career, it's so important to be able to work with different people,
Mhm.
and you really do get to grow and check your own blind spots. And I've just been really appreciative of that advice. I've worked for very liberal organizations, I worked for very conservative organizations, and I don't agree with everything ever 100% of the time, but I think it's definitely made me a better, well-rounded person.
Absolutely. Uh, in terms of, your interest, I feel like we've already talked about what inspired you to go into this career, but any interests that have made you specifically interested in the free speech field?
Oh gosh, yes. So 7 years ago, I thought this was going to be a great career for someone who was just a passionate dork like me that just loved the Constitution for some random reason, and it would be great. My undergrad degree is in political theory, constitutional democracy. Like, I'm just a dork. But what I've learned in the last 4 or 5 years is how much the First Amendment bleeds into everything. If you're excited about technology, you have to know how the First Amendment, you have to know how that works. If you're excited about criminal justice reform, right? Just the basics of people being able to organize, to come together. If that stops, you cannot get these reforms. I think you're seeing it in Congress now. If people do not learn how to work together, we're not going to get any of these reforms. It doesn't matter. It can't be all Black people, all white people, all Republicans, all Democrats, all men, or all women. This country has got to learn to have real conversations and have a free exchange of ideas if we really want to progress. And I think that's the coolest thing. You cannot find anything that you're passionate about that does not relate right back to those five protections and free speech.
Absolutely. So, can you walk us through, like, pretend we know nothing about law, but we're listening to this today. We're an undergraduate student and we're like, oh, wow, this is interesting. This may be something that I want to do. Can you, base level, of course, but walk us through what we need to do to get here?
Well, I would first say if you are all excited at all about any public topic, if you're excited or passionate about education reform, immigration, criminal justice, technology, all of that will require you to work within free speech some way. I think the most important is if you feel that your voice matters, then get involved with something because you just learn more. But the basic premise is that in order for you to do anything that you want, whether it's the company that you're going to go work for, they have a specific law that allows them to operate the way that they do. So I would just say, regardless of where you see your interests, dabble in free speech advocacy because it just helps elevate everything else that you plan on doing. And I would say that if you're involved with organizations at your school now, to really get involved and to look at your codes, your speech codes. So what those are basically your manual that tells you all the policies that your school has. And you'll see things like, we're committed to free speech, but we don't tolerate speech that may offend people. Well, what does offend mean? And truly ask, can you actually grow unless you're made uncomfortable a little bit? It's like a muscle. If you work out, if you're still comfortable after that workout, you did not work out. And I think it's a shame when students aren't challenged in that way, because I do think there's so much, this generation in particular, I have not seen historically since the 50s and 60s truly be passionate about outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
But to realize that protesting is fabulous. And I want people out there peacefully doing it every single day.
Mm-hmm.
But I also want people to critically think about how to come together and actually have solutions. And that's going to be the next step. So I would just say, again, like anything that you're passionate about, even if it's, English literature, there is a connection there, and your ability to grow rests solely on the ability for this, for First Amendment and free speech to stay where it is.
Absolutely. Thank you. And then can you tell us something that you're super proud of in your career?
Okay. Yeah. So a couple years ago, I was able, I'll do this one. So a few weeks ago, actually, one of my colleagues is a city council member in Culpeper, Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
And Culpeper, Virginia has a lot of historical bad things that they need to work out. It had a lot of issues, obviously, during the Civil War, had a lot more issues, unfortunately, in the 100 years after. And now with all of the, latest conversation around Confederate monuments and statues and things like that, this community started having protests and wanting to deal with things like some of the street signs, for example, that were named after some pretty horrific people. So I helped moderate a panel where we brought in people from the community, people from the religious community, different diverse backgrounds, different colors. And we first just talked about where everybody was and how everybody felt. But then we used free speech principles and this idea of, sharing our feelings and our exchange of ideas around this to actually get to solutions. And so I was really excited to see that town do that, because they really had to pull the Band-Aid off. They all had to get uncomfortable. They all had to acknowledge that just because they disagree does not mean that person's a Nazi or that person is a communist, or, you got to get past that and see people for who they are. And they were able to get to a solution, which I thought was really cool. So basically what they're going to do now is they're going to keep having these conversations, but the city council is basically going to create their own curriculum about their community, the history about their town, the good, the bad, all of it. And they're actually just going to film it like a field trip and just kind of look at these different markers in their town and really be honest about it. And instead of having to go vote with the city council or have a law change, this was just people in the community that came together. And once they got past the emotions, everyone agreed. They're like, wait, yeah, we have a history here. It's good, it's bad, but we all need to know it, and let's talk about it. And it was actually quite simple, but it was really beautiful to really see people get out of their comfort zone, deal with their emotions, but then actually have a goal in mind. So, I just encourage everyone to do that. They didn't end up rioting. There was no violence. And people built friendships out of it. And so their next task is they're just going to have a big dinner together as the community, like a big long picnic table, and talk. And I just think that is the beauty of it, that's where we need to be headed.
That's so great. Wow. Well, I want to ask one last question before we get out of here. Do you have any advice? So, for anyone who's out there listening, it could be a student, it could be someone who's looking to change their career. Any advice for anyone out there?
Be true to yourself. My grandfather always said, no matter what, at the end of the day, when you get up and walk outside the door, keep a mirror by the door. Because when you come in and leave every day, you need to be able to look at yourself in the mirror. And I think that's like the coolest thing that I ever heard. I'm very proud of that. I'm very proud, even when I have to defend, the wannabe Nazi group, and even when I want to defend someone that says that they don't like me because of the color of my skin, I'm okay with that because I know how important it is to make sure that the next generation that looks like me can talk. And so I'm able to hold my head up high. And I think that's the main thing. You just have to be able to not worry about what other people think. Other people aren't going to pay your bills. That's
Right.
not the thing. Other people are not going to pay your student loans. You are. Don't worry about what they think. Just make sure you can look in the mirror every day and you can be proud of what you're doing.
Absolutely. Oh, Shelby, thank you so much for joining us today. It was such a pleasure, hearing from you, talking to you, and just learning from you today.
Well, thank you so much. And like I said, if anybody reaches out to you, any students, you don't have to be in law school. In fact, we need a lot of people that are cooler than lawyers. And if you're into art school or whatever, that's all free speech. So please just reach out to me via email if anybody wants to chat more, and just let me know. It was fabulous. And thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. You have an amazing day.
You as well.
Thank you.